We're starting Shoftim Perek Hey, the 5th chapter of Sefer Shoftim, and today we thank Moshe and Paula Weinstein, who are sponsoring today's shir, not for a commemoration but for a celebration, as they became great grandparents, Baruch Hashem again, and they just celebrated this week the birth of a great grandson in Israel. And Be'ezrat Hashem, there's no greater investment in the land of Israel than human capital, than giving Israel bright Jewish future. And Be'ezrat Hashem, he should be part of bright Jewish future. Be'ezrat Hashem, thank you for celebrating with us. We look forward to many other celebrations at the right time. Be'ezrat Hashem. Let's do a little bit of learning it together. So here we go. This is where we move from narrative to song. So it's important to realize that there is narrative. Narrative is where you have a narrator describing a story, and then we step out of narrative sometimes, and this is where we move to, this is not a narrative, this is a song. This is, in the song there are narratives, but this is somebody at the time reflecting on what just happened. And so sometimes a lot of us go blank stare, like what's going on over here. There's just a lot of words, it's very poetic, and so we skip these chapters and we move onwards. But embedded in every song is, in fact, a lot of richness. Let's try to appreciate some of that richness for a second as we dive in. So the first thing to be aware of is just one of the things that I like to do whenever looking at a text is just get a sense of the structure. Because if you have a sense of the structure, then you're no longer looking at words, you're looking at coherent arguments and ideas. So in this song, it's the way I would argue to break it up is to break it up into 7 sections, which we're going to each look at individually. There's an introduction, there's describing the specific situation, there's describing those who did not join the fight, the miracles, specifically the victory, Yael's actions, the mother of Sisera, and finally one concluding line, which is the conclusion as we move forward. But we're going to look at each of those 7 sections individually. We could spend a lot of time trying to understand every word and every inference and all just even the phonetic, trying to look at the repeated words and the rhyme. We're not going to spend time on that because there's not enough time to really give this song the due diligence. We are going to get a sense of the ideas, and then I'll leave it for you to go further. But one thing which is worthwhile noting before we go into the specifics of the song, because I divided it up over here in our notes, is actually the way it appears in the Tanakh. So if you look at the text that I put in front of you, you'll see that there's at the end of every 2 words there's like a little samach in brackets. And then there's a resh in brackets, right? Mm-hmm. You see that? So what that means is, what that looks like is if you flip to the 3rd page, this is what it looks like, right? That samach represents the word stuma, which means a closed paragraph, right? So you'll see that there's all those breaks in the line, okay? What you're looking at right now is the Leningrad manuscript. The Leningrad manuscript is a manuscript, which means that it's before the printing press. This is about 1,000 years old, and this is one of the codexes that were used to preserve the posterity of the Torah. We also have, of course, the Aleppo Codex, which predates this one. There's the Ben Sasson Codex. There's a number of codexes which were handwritten and guarded by specific families in charge of ensuring the posterity of the Torah. And along the sides, you'll see little inscriptions. That's called the Misorah. These are little codes created by the Masoretes. The Masoretes, the Masoretic families in charge of ensuring the posterity of the Torah. Unfortunately, the Aleppo Codex is missing most of the Torah, but it has from Nevi'im onwards. The Leningrad manuscript is more complete, although slightly later. It wasn't because it was made in Leningrad. That's where it's being stored right now. Okay, but that's just where it happens to be at this point in time. But be it as it may, this is what it looks like, and you'll notice the structure over here. This is a familiar structure. And especially, we'll come back to Cantabia. Baruch Rofei Chalim.
Thank you.
So this is what's called, as the Gemara describes it, Ariach al Gabe Levena. The Gemara says a very interesting thing. The Gemara at the top of the 4th page says, Amar Rabbi Chanina bar Papa, Darash Rabbi Shila ish kfar tamarta. So Rabbi Shila ish kfar tamarta said, Kol ashiros kol nichtavos Ariach al Gabe Levena, Levena al Gabe Ariach. All the songs in the Torah are written half bricks on top of full bricks. That's the structure. But chutz mishirazu malchei Kanan she'ariach al gabe ariach ulevena al gabe levea. The song that's referring to over there is referring to the 10 sons of Haman, because this is Maseches Megillah, and the 31 kings of Canaan, which we saw in Sefer Yehoshua. where they are just half bricks on top of half bricks and full bricks on top of full bricks, right? Which, if you remember the way the song is structured, is 2 columns, right? 2 columns with a gap in the middle. That's called ariach al gabe ariach and levena al gabe levena. And why is that? Says my tama we're talking about the fall of bad people when it comes to the sons of Haman and the 31 Canaanite kings. So we want them to fall. We want it to be unstable. By inference, therefore, our pattern of half bricks on top of full bricks is therefore a pattern of stability. Right? So we're describing here a pattern of stability, which is being described in the song. And so just the first thing to be aware of is this is a song which is meant to last, right? It's meant to be something which is a solid structure. If you think about it, it looks like a wall, right? That's really what it's meant to be. It's like the way a wall is made in a safe way, which is that the layer of the next layer of bricks is gaps are covered by bricks, right? And that's what the structure looks like if you look at the Leningrad Codex, right? Every gap has a brick on top of it and below it, so it's a full structure. What is also really worthwhile noting is in the structure is that the gaps have meaning. Because if you think about this from the perspective of the human experience, when we go through something in life, oftentimes things don't add up. You know, we have progress, and there's a halt in progress in our lives, whether it's personally or nationally. And we say, Hashem, what's going on right now? What's happening? How's this working? And then there's a little bit of progress, and then there's another gap. But afterwards, when you look back at it, we say, oh, wait a second, all of those were steps. Even the gaps were part of the progress, right? Even for the gaps, somehow the detours were part of the progression towards something greater, which means you can only appreciate the song of this nature reflecting our real life at the end, when the gaps itself were actually part of the pauses in real life which reflected the song. But while we're going through it, it's very hard to express. And this is somehow also captured in the gaps of the song, not just the song itself. We're going to come back to this in a second, because this obviously reflects a much more popular song that we know about. We'll come back to that in just a second. But let's break it down to pieces. Our first paragraph of this is talking about the greatness of Hashem. It's a very powerful description. Let's just reflect on it. So I'm not going to do the whole thing because it is long, it's 31 pesukim long. But if we look at the first section, it's Vatoshar Devora uBarak ben Avinoah bayamahu leimor. They sang. So Devora and Barak sang on that day. So first of all, notice who is the lead. Is Devora. Like she was the lead in battle and Barak was the vehicle, similarly even in the song, it is Barak following her. Why do you think there's the word leimor in the sentence? Leimor is to be said. What do you think it means in this context? By everybody. That's the point. Is she's not trying to take the stage here. She's not looking for 1 million subscribers on the Canaanite YouTube channel. What she's doing is she wants people to actually be part of this. So she's saying, I'm going to give you the tools of articulation so you can reflect upon this historical watershed moment. Leimor, I want you to, similarly, Az Yashir was Leimor, similarly is to be said. In fact, some would argue that even the gaps in the song structure reflect responsiveness, which means she would say a phrase, they would respond. She would sing a phrase, they would respond. So there would be this harmony of even in our prayer it reflects that way. Whenever you do Kedusha or Kaddish, you have the leader and then the community. And the leader and the community, that responsive nature is seen as a holy expression of the reality around us. That's the way we seem to see it. Interesting, right? Let's go a little further here. You notice that she talks about these terrible attacks that are going on, Pra'ot, and she describes Shimu Melachem Ha'azinu. Listen, O kings, in Pasuk Gimel, and open up your ears, the Roznim. Who is she talking to? Because if you don't know the audience of the song, it's going to be hard to appreciate what she's trying to do. So she sounds like she's talking to the Melachim. Who is she talking to? The Radak says it's referring to the non-Jewish kings, meaning take heed, understand. Look what happened to Sisera. Sisera did not end up dying peacefully with his family surrounding him. He died on the battlefield, killed by a woman in a tent. So listen to this. Understand what's going to happen if you fight with us. That's the one audience. But then the Radak says something which sounds very Hasidish, and he says, no. All of Israel are like Melachim. all of the Jews the Israelites are like kings. This is way before Chassidus. And he says that all of us are very special. So maybe the audience is not the non-Jewish kings, but it is us. And this is so profound, is sometimes we need to be listening. We need to be reading the tea leaves. We need to be understanding this was amazing. Right? Sometimes the non-Jews reminds me of the story. Rav Shechter describes he was once in Israel, and he was taking a tour, and next to him there was a Japanese non-Jewish Japanese tour guide, and she was giving this incredibly elaborate description about the biblical prophecies and the nation of Israel and being exiled but still being kept, and then they're going to come back and establish the land. The land's going to greet them. And he listened to it and he said, wow. He went over to her and he says, I wish more Jews would speak like you, right? And she says, you're right, it's a pasuk in Tanakh. So what did she say? No, you'll never say this again the same way. Okay, ready for this? So she says, this is what you say before benching every day, right? What is it in Tehillim? Kuf Chav Zayin in Shir HaMalos, where we say, Oz Yomru, Kuf Chav Vav, where it says, Oz Yomru Bagoyim Higdil Hashem La'asos Simon. The nations will say, look what God did with this people. Higdil Hashem La'asos Simon. And the nation of Israel will say, look what God did with us. Meaning sometimes we'll take the people on the outside saying, this is crazy, this is extraordinary, this is unusual. And then the Jews will say, you know what, that is pretty extraordinary. And so that's it. And she said that. So think about that pasuk. That's how you share Amanos the Shabbos. Is sometimes we have to learn the lesson from the outside. And that's a little bit over here. Is Shimu Melachim. She's saying, kings on the outside, listen, but sometimes it's also Jews, Israelites, Hebrews. Listen, understand some things afoot here. This is not business as usual on a Thursday. So this is part of the audience as well. Interesting is just one interesting poetic flourish she uses. Look at pasuk Dalet. She says, Hashem b'tzeischa meseir b'tzadcha mistei Edom eretz ra'asha gam shomayim notafu. She describes as God leaves Seir and he comes from the fields of Edom. What's that got to do with anything? Edom is in the area of Petra today, right? Which is in Jordan. As God comes out of Edom and Seir and he comes and he expresses himself in Israel. What's that got? That wasn't part of the story. That wasn't on the geography of this particular story, right? So why is that relevant here? So already. The Ralbag says, no, it might be referring to future wars. Meaning, maybe Hashem is saying, this is going to be the model for when they will become a problem, and we'll fast forward to Melachim Beis later on. Okay, maybe that's what we're referring to. But Rashi says, no. This goes back to a pasuk in Parshas V'zos HaBracha. Right? So it's referring to the idea of how Hashem gave the Torah, and he went to Edom and Seir first, and offered the Torah to them. And they said, no, thank you. Right? So this is actually comparing this experience to Matan Torah. Like Hashem expressed himself to Seir and Edom, the other nations, and they declined, so too. Then you say, well, what's this got to do with Matan Torah? And the answer is everything. This is what Rashi points out. Why are we in this pickle in the first place? The answer is because we didn't listen to the Torah. We just thought it would be all right to be friends. We don't want to kill those Canaanites, right? That would be so 13th century BCE, right? We're 21st century, sensible, moral human rights activists. So why would we do that? And then it turned out to be a problem because we didn't listen to Hashem and the Torah. So Rashi is saying I want to tell you where this comes from. This comes from the fact that Hashem chose you as a nation, and with that came a mandate and responsibility. And the failure to comply is going to lead to where we are. So this is what Rashi points out over here, is we have to trace it back. We have to have the context first. This is the first section. We now move into our second section, which is now actually specific to our case. And we see something which we didn't know before we read this. And this is the voice of the people living under oppression. Look at Pasuk Vav. Himei Shamgar ben Anas b'nei Yael. So in the days of Shamgar, remember Shamgar was our previous Shofet, so clearly it was not a perfect time, right? And the days of Yael, we have to see why she's mentioned. Chadlu arachos, the ways were stopped. V'olchei nesivos yelchu ba'arachos akal kalois. And those who walked on the roads would walk in deterred pathways. In order to get the Chadlu Perazon b'Yisrael Chadelu at Shikamti Devora Shikamti and Yisrael, and the people were not walking on the streets until Devora was established as the mother in Israel. That's what we have as describing this. Now, by the way, you of course notice the poetic use of the use of words. So, for instance, the word chadlu has appeared 3 times in that pasuk, right? It's sort of the refrain. It's the mila mancha in that particular setting. But to me, whenever you think about this, I just think about going back to the 1950s. In the Galil, in the Upper Galilee, if you remember, going back to pre-1967. So if I put the map in of where the Golanites are controlled, it's on page 5 by Syria, and they literally are the heights, right? So these, I put in a picture just of what it looked like, with a Jewish tractor. The farmers are trying to farm the fertile land of the around the Galilee on the west, and they were being picked off by snipers. There was sniper fire as well. I just put in 2 JTA articles because, of course, nobody remembers this history now. But this is in 1951, in May 8th. Israel for today formally requests the United Nations Security Council to place its agenda a complaint of aggression by Syria. The request was made in a letter received this morning by the President of the Security Council from the permanent Israel delegate Abe Eben, right? And to quote, it is to put Israel's complaint of aggression on its agenda. Mr. Eben declared that the note that my government is now conclusive proof of the operations of Syrian forces on Israel territory, and also holds is Syria responsible for irregular forces which have taken up positions in the demilitarized zones and beyond. Of course, the UN was very quick to do nothing. So 11 years later, in 1962, we have it again. This is now Israel requesting again from the Security Council. And in this, I just put in the last paragraph, requesting the Security Council to call on the Syrian government to desist forthwith from all aggressive acts against Israel. And he goes on to say, Israel's letter stated, if, however, such aggressive acts continue, Israel, in exercise its right of self-defense, will have to use all the means at its disposal to prevent the continuance of such actions and protect the rights of the citizens to free and uninterrupted use of its territory, as well as the safety of its police on Lake Tiberias. So what was happening was that you'd have regular farmers going out there, and they were being shot upon every single day. Right? People would not be able to sleep in their rooms. They would have to sleep in bunkers because of Syrian snipers throughout the course of the 1950s and the 1960s. Of course, the narrative today is Israel aggression and takes over because they want to, they still call it on the maps, still occupied territory. I mean, like, who are we occupying it from? The dysfunctional non-state of Syria run by a terrorist? Who are we occupying it from? But nonetheless, the reason why we did this was because this was actually the same area. For me, it's a striking historical parallel, is Chodlu Arachois, and the idea of not being able to travel on the highways, having to go on detours. Anybody who grew up in Israel will know what this history is resonant. This is exactly what we experienced when we had enemies controlling the heights. And so it's something which whenever I read the song, it always haunts me, the connection to our times. Now, she calls herself a mother. Do you notice this? She kanti ein. She's writing about herself, right? So why does she call herself a mother in this particular case situation? It's interesting. The Malbim says, you know why? It's as if she says, I am birthing this nation, because ultimately a mother takes care of everything of the child, even when the child isn't listening, even when the child's not pulling its share, even when the child's not there. She is, in a certain sense, the metaphoric mother caring for this nation at this critical time. It's a very powerful metaphor. It also speaks to the power of women, which we spent time looking at last week, which is the power which actually moves this victory forward. What is interesting is notice the way she describes human action in this case. We'll come back to it later on. But in Pasuk Yud Beis, she says, Uri Devora, Uri Devora, Uri Dabri Shir. So Devora's role is to sing song. And Kum Barak Ushavei Shevyocha Ben Avinoam, and get up Ben Avinoam, that's Barak, and take captives. So what's his role in the battle? His role in the battle is when the enemies have died, just take them captive, which means, in a certain sense, it's like a laid table, right? Meaning it's not even like you're fighting, right? I'm just come to the battlefield and take the captives because they've been washed away, right? Meaning, just you don't notice even the language she's using is describing the passivity of humans in this case, and the action of God by example. Now we'll come back to human action in a second. But in the third section is really an unbelievable thing, an unbelievable section. Here now she impugns she now actually accuses, she thanks the collaborators and she criticizes the non-collaborators. It's a very powerful section. In this section, she describes in Pasuk Yudalet, Mini Ephraim, Sharsham ba'Amalek, Acharecha Binyamin ba'Amamecha. Wow, Ephraim, you were fighting Amalek, because that refers to Yeshua, who comes from Ephraim. Then Binyamin is perhaps a prophetic, overture for the future, whether they came now or it's also the future of Shaul who's going to be fighting. Bini Machir, Yardu Mechakakem. Machir refers to which tribe? Machir is a representative he's the patriarch of Menashe. Machir is the son of Menashe. So she's now noted 3 tribes that have come to her aid. We've seen Ephraim, Benjamin, and Menashe. Mizvulun, Moshchim, Shevet Sofer. She says Zvulun, of course, because Zvulun was the epicenter of this. Sarai is Yisachar, Devora, Yisachar ben Barak, Be'emek Shulach Raglav, and then Yisachar is involved. So we see like an incredible alliance of the Israelite tribes. But now the tone changes. She goes on, she says, Biplagus Ruvain, Gedolim Chikekei Lev, Lami Oshata ben HaMishpasayim Lishmoa Shrikas Adorim. She turns to Ruvain and she says, why are you sitting in your farms listening to the call of the sheeps, right? To the call of the sheep, while this is going on. Liflagoz Ruvain Gedolim Chikekei Lev, Gilad be'ever Yarden Shochem, V'dan Lama Yagub Anyos. Why in Gilad, down south in the area of Gad? Why were they just like sitting there? Why were the tribe of Dan just going and doing their sea trade as if there was nothing else going on here? So there seems to be a very, very stark criticism on the other tribes. It is helpful to notice the map for a second. Just move with me to page 7. So you remember the area of Chatzor, which is where Sisra and Yavin come from, is just to the left, to the west of the Kinneret. Okay, so the epicenter of this is Naphtali, Zvulun, and Yisachar. So those 3 tribes are very clearly going to be active in fighting back. That makes sense because they are the immediate collateral damage. What is interesting is she's praising also Menashe, which is Menashe's east and west below. And then she is including Ephraim and Binyamin who've come to their aid, right? So those are the collateral effects. But she's calling out Dan, Gad, and Reuven. Those 3 tribes are the ones she's calling out. They're not as directly connected. They're not in the collateral sphere of this, but they should have been heeding the call of the battle. That's what she's arguing. No, she doesn't stretch further down to Yehuda. Interesting enough, she doesn't mention Yehuda explicitly. Also, Asher is absent in this description, but these are the tribes she's calling out, and this speaks to the struggle of Sefer Shoftim. The struggle is localization, right? Everybody's saying, look, you know what? I'm just paying off the mortgage. The vineyard is just taking. I'm just trying to get my life. I need to figure it out. The kids are in school. It's the middle of the semester. The girls are in seminary. The boys are in yeshiva. It's getting them back right now. I don't have time to deal with national issues. Right? I can't get them onto the LL bus from yeshiva right now. That's my biggest issue. And it's but what she's saying is you got to stop focusing on yourself. There's a national crisis here, right? And so this is what real leadership looks like. Real leadership is saying everybody shares this responsibility. It's not just one locale, right? And we're going to see this devolve as Sefer Shoftim goes on further into smaller fractions and factions, unfortunately. This is one of the struggles of this over here. I will point out that Dan, interestingly enough, even though Dan is down by the sea there, Dan later on will move up to the north, which is the direct area over here, to the area called Tel Dan, which is Bezrat Hashem, hopefully you'll get a chance to visit the next trip, which is just by the Lebanon border, which is where Dan does move to, which makes him even more perhaps responsible to be part of this battle, which he's not doing, right? So just to understand this as well, it seems to be that the specific criticism on Gad and Reuven is because if you remember the conquest of the land, their responsibility was first, right? They were the chalutz, they were the first military entree into the land of Israel, and they did not pick up their tab in this case. So there seems to be this extra criticism on them right now, which is what she's calling out in this shir. By the way, if this is going to be a national shir and for all posterity, we have it today in the 21st century, it's a great shaming, right? I mean, can you imagine how shaming this is for it to be read about that your tribe was not part of, did not respond to the conscription call even when the victory was imminent. Okay, we now move into the miracles of the victory. We did discuss this slightly last week, so we're not going to spend an exceptional amount of time. But if you remember, we looked at the portrait last time, by Giordano Luca, in the defeat of Sisera, and there seems to be a supernatural perspective, which does seem to be part of the song itself. Because if you remember, the way she describes it is somewhat supernatural, it sounds like, right? In Pasuk Chaf, as an example, she says, Min Shemaim nilchamu, ha'kochavim misilasam nilchamu in Sisra. From the heavens, the stars were fighting with Sisra, Nachal Kishon Garafam, and then we have the valley, the stream sweeping them away, which leads many of the Farshim to say this was a supernatural intervention. So Rashi points out that we're talking about the Kochavim, literally some celestial spheres having an influence directly on terrestrial affairs, okay? But, interestingly enough, there are those who are a little more hesitant to this. So as an example, the Radak says, Bina Shamayim Nilchamo in source 16, Kol Kach Hayan Yitzachon Gadol, Shenitzchu Yisrael, Chel Sisroi, Ke'ilu, Mina Shamayim Nilchamo Mitzrayim. No, this was an earthly success. It just seemed so supernatural. It was like the stars. And we saw this last week when we were looking at the history of this area, the Jezreel Valley, and how it floods, and perhaps the storm which may have prevented the Canaanites from using their military technology, which was their chariots, and falling prey to the foot soldiers of Israel. So how miraculous or how metaphoric this is a debate, and the Psukim itself give forth that ambiguity itself. This we spent a little bit of time last week, so I'm going to skip over it more. But I do want to point out there is in this section one extra verse which is worthwhile thinking about, which is Pasuk Chav Gimel, is that she curses. She goes, "Aru Meroz, cursed be Meroz." Omar Malach Hashem, Aru Arur Yashveach, let the inhabitants be cursed. Ki loy bo le'ezras Hashem by Giborim. They did not come to the help of Israel and the help of God. By the way, and again, of course, that's poetic. Le'ezras Hashem by Giborim. Let's take a parallelism, okay? But B'yezameh. Okay, so who is Meroz precisely? So Rashi explains on page 8, source 617, he says, who's Meroz? Amri la koichva hava. So maybe he was some sort of celestial force. Meaning, Hashem, you aligned all these heavenly powers to help us, and there was one heavenly power that didn't help us. So she's cursing that heavenly power. That's pretty intense, right? Or it could be va'amrila. Some Rashi it says Rashi gavra chashiva hava v'haya samuch lamakom melchama v'loy ba. No. He was a rich fellow. He had an estate just next to the battlefield. But he's like, when the battle happened, he didn't want to know about it because it's time for harvest. I don't want to interrupt my workers. I don't want to get involved. Let the other people do the work, and we'll come back. So she's cursing the non-involvement. What's interesting is she's singling out somebody obviously everybody knows, right? Who's involved, and she's cursing him much like she criticizes Reuven and Gad. She now curses those who think the work should be done by others. Right? When there's a national calamity, everybody needs to be involved, and she is cursing those who think that other work will be done by others while they go on with their business. It fits very much into the theme of what she's been saying up till now. And now, to contrast that, she now brings in somebody who did make it her business. And that's Yael. And this is such a famous scene, but it's described so powerfully over here in the song, where she really sings to the praise of Yael. And there's so many paintings throughout the history of this. I just put in over here the Yael and Sisera by Jan Peters in the 1500s. Very powerful portrait of the death of Sisera at the hands of Yael. But listen to her description. Tavarach min Hashem Yael, eshes chever hakeni. Blessed be among women is Yael. Min Hashem bo'el tavarach. From women in the tent, they're to be blessed. We'll see what that means in a second. Mayim sho'al chalav nasna. He asked just for a cup of water. She gave him heavy milk, right? To put him to sleep. Sefer ladirimi kriva chemon. And she gave him butter, meaning all these heavy, right? All these calories. Yada yaseh tishlachna v'yimina lahalmus amelim v'halmos tisra machakov rashoy machatzav v'cholfo rakosoi. So as he was sleeping, she sends her hands to the tent peg and she takes the hammer. She drives it through him, through his temple. Bein raglea nakara nafal shachav. Bein raglea kara nafal. Kabasher kara sham nafal shadud. He fell between her legs. He fell lying down, right? And so this image of this great warrior crumpled in a pile at the foot of this homemaker, of Yael. This is a very powerful image. It's interesting that the Gemara says that isn't just descriptive. The Gemara makes two observations in the paragraph we just read, which I think gives a lot more texture to this conversation. The Gemara in Harios, in source 19, page 9, observes, Amar Ula, Tamar zin Zimri zina. Okay, we're going to skip the first section to the end of the first line. Amar Rav Nachman, Bar Yisra, Gedola Avera Lishma, Mimitzah Shalal Lishma. Great is Avera, an untoward action committed for the right reasons, than the right action committed for the wrong reasons. Okay, what does that mean? She says, Shenemar Tavorach minashim el eshes chever akeni, minashim ba'oel Tavorach, maninu nashim ba'oel, Sarah, Rivka, Rachel, Velea. So when it says that she's blessed, more blessed than the ladies in the tent, it's not just saying ladies who are colleagues in the tent, it's referring to the women in the tent of the matriarchs, meaning Yael has more zechus than the matriarchs themselves. Why? How does that relate to the phrase that we said? An avera lishma mi mitzvah shalal lishma, right? A avera done for the right reasons. What does that mean? So the Gemara comments. It says, "Ini is house is true." Amar Rav Yehuda, lo'olam yasag adam Torah shalal afilu mitzvah shalal lishma shemitak shalal lishma ba lishma. So the Gemara says, well, surely even if, let's say, you don't feel it, you're not feeling it in Judaism, you should still do it, even if it's Shalal Lishma, you'll come to Lishma. So, of course, that's very important, the Gemara says, but still, Avera Shalal Lishma has power. This is a very dangerous area, because Avera Lishma gets murky. But what's it referring to? Why is it referring to Yael? Why is she more blessed than Sarah, Rivka, Rachel, and Leah? So the Gemara says, Amar Rabbi Yochanan, Sheva be'ilos ba'al oisa rasha ba'oisa shah. In the actual language of the song that Gemara is observing. Why? Ben raglea kara nafal shachav. If you look at this pasuk, what is the imagery? The euphemism over here is in lying between her legs, right? Her fallen down. This is an imagery that she took advantage of him by allowing him to get exhausted, by inviting him to her tent, and that's how she was able to kill him. Which means, just understand the complexity of this. The Gemara is saying is she was doing an avera, but lishma, meaning she was doing something. She was a married woman, but she was taking him out of the battlefield, inviting him, and in this way, in order to exhaust him, to kill him, and in this battle, which is what she did. And the Gemara then says, so the Gemara says, how could it be? The Gemara says she gained no pleasure from being with this brute. But over here, this talks about the sacrifice of people. And now let's just come back for a second. You have Meroz, who's clearly an estate owner who lives near this battlefield, who says, I'm not interested in getting involved. And Yael says, Devora says, curses upon you for not being involved. Yael has no skin in this game. In fact, Yael's husband is in a peace treaty with the Canaanites. So she has every right in the world to say, not my problem. And yet she sacrifices herself. She sacrifices her dignity. She sacrifices her own posterity, her own chastity for this monster. Right? We're going to hear about in a second about what kind of monster this man is. Why? Because she sees that she knows the moral calling, and I think it speaks to, and I think the contrast over here is what Devora is underscoring, even though she does it very subtly, is what Devora is trying to say is here is a person who's a not Jewish person, who has a moral calling which comes at great self-sacrifice to end this battle. There are many people during history. If anybody attended the Holocaust, the Yom HaShoah program last week at Beth Shalom, most remarkable story of these French twins who escaped. It was an amazing story. If you didn't hear this, you've got to listen to the story. You've got to first of all come to Yom HaShoah. But it's not enough just to hear about it afterwards. But what was amazing about the story was the depravity of the French authorities and the Germans who are collaborating to use their documentation to hand over the Jews for extermination, and then the singular nature of heroism of individual French people, who at the cost of life and limb, harbored these people to save them. And that contrast is also over here. Is that here is Yael. It's not her business. It's not her problem. But she made it a problem. She saw this was morally right or wrong. Somebody said to me recently, and I think it's so true, is in today's world, in the post-October 7th world, it's very binary. You're either with us or against us. There's no neutrality. Oh, I don't notice. You're either for the calling of life or morality, or depravity and two-facedness and holding up a double standard. That's all there is right now. Yael was a person who was not part of the problem, but she made it a part of the problem at great self-sacrifice, which the Gemara is describing, which is being hinted to here in these psukim, right? Which is what the Gemara is saying. This is a very dangerous topic in general. It's called Avera Lishma, right? And because you can understand how people might misinterpret or misuse this type of language or this type of ideas, concept. But in this particular case, she is lauded for it. She is praised for her sacrifice that she made in order to vanquish this person, which now gives us to be able to turn the lens to one other woman, the third hidden woman in this story, and that is the last section, which is the mother of Sisera. What an amazing story is how this closes. You look at the psukim from Pasuk Chav Ches. I'm going to read it just because it's so powerful. So while this is all going on, the camera pans all the way back to Chatzor or Charoshat Agorim, wherever they happen to be. And Ba'ara Chalon Nishkafa, through the window she looks, V'tiyabev Eim Sisra, and she starts to cry. Ba'ara Ha'eshnov, again, that's the poetic repetition there. Madua Boishesh Richbo Lavo, why is his chariot tarrying and coming? Madua Echaru Pa'amei Markavosav, why are the footbeats of his steeds late? And her wives, her women in waiting, tell her, and she says to herself, no, he's pillaging more, he's taking more spoils. Now he's just taking, the scarves, he's taking the booty, he's taking the clothing and the silks off the bodies that he is pillaging, right? So, this is the description of the mother Sisera. A very remarkable description. I included the artwork over here of from the 1800s of Albert Joseph Moore on page 10. It's very hard to capture that emotion, the emotion of a mother waiting for a child, looking through the window. It's a very powerful, very hard to capture that sort of expectant, that anticipation, that pain of knowing. It's very, very difficult. A few things to be aware of is, first of all, is what are the types of things that her women in waiting are giving her as a consolation. Don't worry, he's doing his regular business. He's raping, he's stealing, and he's killing. Right? Everything's fine. So the first thing we should just be aware of is that she understands who her son is. He is a brute. He is a monster. Right? He is a person who doesn't give quarter. He takes advantage of anybody in battle or off the battlefield. That's the type of person she is, and when she hears this, it gives her a sense of calm. But there's more to this. The Malbim observes that actually she had a premonition, and in the premonition she saw him lying with red around his head at the feet or at the foot of a woman, right? And so this is the image she had, which of course is the image of his last moments as Zal sends the tent peg through his temple, right? So that's the red is the blood accumulating around his head and is at the feet of Yael as she murders him, as she assassinates this Canaanite general. What is interesting is that perhaps the Malbim says is that her Saraseha, Tanena, they're trying to reinterpret the premonition. What they're saying is no. He stands at the feet of women because he's just raped them. He's got red around his neck because he's taking more silks from them, which they're trying to prop up the imagery that she has seen, knowing his demise, and give an alternative perspective, which is what they're giving, which is why women are involved in this description over here as well, which speaks to the very profound observation, which is that the mother of Sisera should be an ancillary and irrelevant character in Jewish history, but yet she is not at all. And I'll tell you why she's not. Because the Gemara in Rosh Hashanah describes in Lamed Gimel Amud Beis, Amar Abaye Baha Vaday Pligi T'chsiv Yom Troy Yelachem. On Rosh Hashanah it's called a day of Teruah. What does that mean? Umetargaminun Yom Yavava Yahei Lachon. It's a day of Yavava, which means crying. So it's Ksiv V'ima de Sisra Ba'ara Chalon Tishkafa V'tiabev Eim Sisra Mar Sova Ganuchi Gonach, Umar Sova Yaluli Yolal. The question is what type of crying is the Torah referring to when it says Yom Teruah, which is translated as a Yom Yavava. Yavava is the same word as the mother of Sisra, Vatiyabev. Is it Ganuchi Gonach, which is the slow, like moaning? Or is it Yaluli Yolal, the shrill, like whimpering in the crying? Right? And that, in fact, informs the way we interpret the word Trua in the Torah. How do we make the shofar blast on Rosh Hashanah between the tekiyos? Is it the slow groaning, which we call the shvarim? Is it the shrill whimpering, which is the trua? Or is it both? Is it shvarim trua? Is it groaning leading into whimpering? And how is that? That comes, in fact, from the mother Sisra as she starts to cry. She looks to that window, and the longer she looks, the longer her son doesn't come. And what is interesting is, in fact, even so much so, a number of the Rishonim point out that the reason why we try to get 100 blasts, right, we have 30, 30, 30, and then 10. Well, the reason why we have 100 blasts is because she cried 100 times as she waited in vain for the return of her son. And you say to yourself, why her? Out of all the people, she birthed this brute. She birthed the person who was, is going to be memorialized for his taking advantage of people, of women. This is the type of cry that we want to memorialize in our Rosh Hashanah. And Rav Soloveitchik observes in his Days of Awe an amazing observation. That is, think about this for a second, is that we are all the mother of Sisra to a certain degree. Why? Because we have certain self-conceptions, right? We think about ourselves, we try to imagine that we're doing all right, and that we've got good friendships, and that we're good parents and good grandparents, and we're good siblings, and we're good neighbors. And at a certain point, sometimes we keep telling ourselves, meaning people keep telling this to us, like her courtiers, but Afi Tanena, Amrana Nafsha, she says to herself, she's like, yes, that's right, I am a good person, that's what we say to ourselves. What is her cry? Her cry is where the hairline fractures of reality become big enough to realize that the delusions of self-awareness are come crashing down, where they break open and you realize that reality is going to show you that your vision of self is not who you are. Meaning the longer she keeps saying this, the longer he doesn't come. The longer he doesn't come, the more she starts to cry, realizing the story they are weaving for her is not the real story. And that's what we do every Rosh Hashanah. All year long, we talk about who we think we are. And then sometimes there's a crisis which makes us aware of the fact that we aren't as perfect as we thought we were. And maybe the reason why there is a trail of burnt bridges around our relationships is not because of all the other people. Maybe we own some of that as well. And therefore, that's why we cry like the mother of Sisra in the shofar. We cry realizing that the story doesn't hold. Right? That's a very profound observation. That's what's being captured over here is not just the mother, but also the story, which is folding, which is falling down of the delusion. And finally, the last pasuk of the parak really sets us in a very powerful perspective. The last pasuk of the parak is sort of moving it to the next one. It says, "Ken Yavdu Kol Avecha Hashem, let all the enemies of Hashem be destroyed like Sisra. V'avav Katzes Hashem is to be grosain. Those who love Him are like the Shemesh, the sun rising in its strength. V'tishkod haaretz 40 shana. And there's 40-year reprieve. Generally speaking, 20 years is a good time. 40 years is double. This is a really good time. The Rashi and the Ralbaigan all talk about the idea of the sun rising and the sense of light and power. But just to be aware of something as well is that, as we will see throughout Shoftim, because we'll move onwards now, is that not all Shoftim are going to be as good as Osniel, Shamgar, Devora, and Barak. We're going to see that as we move onwards, there's going to be many deficiencies. And I wonder if the sun, Big Vurasai, is the sun at midday. Because after midday, it starts becoming afternoon. And the afternoon is about to start a Shoftim where it's not as powerful. We're not going to have leaders like Devora again in the rest of Sefer Shoftim. And I wonder if there's a symbolism in that as well. I'd like to conclude with one last observation, and that is, if you look at the Leningrad Codex, there's another song which looks directly like our song, and that's called Az Yashir. Right? The first song, which is Ariach Al Gab Elevena, is Az Yashir. This song of Devora, in fact, is a third longer. It's longer than the song of Az Yashir itself. If you've ever been listening to the Haftarah of Pashas B'Shalach, you'll notice, because the Haftarah of Pashas B'Shalach is our Perek, and it's after B'Shalach, because that's when it's the Shir HaSayam. And it should not be lost upon us that, of course, they are both songs about the enemies of Israel being vanquished by some sort of miraculous water event, where, right, the brook of Kishon washes them away, much like the sea of reeds washes away the enemies. But there is one profound difference, and I think it's really important to be aware of. If you read Az Yashir, it's in Pesukei Zimra every day. Read through Az Yashir and think about who the song is celebrating. The song is squarely celebrating the miracles of God. There is no human action involved whatsoever. In fact, everything is about HaKadosh Baruch Hu and the waves and the enemies just being smashed down. Hashem building mi kamocha ba'elim, Hashem mi kamocha nedar HaKodesh, nora silos oisefele. It's all about the actions of God. And what's interesting is, contrast that to Shiras Devora. Listen to this. She come to Devora, she come to Em Yisrael. She calls herself the mother of the story. She calls Misnadvim Ba'am Baruch Hu Hashem, those who came forward to bless be with God, the ones who came forward in conscription. Uri Devora, Uri Dabri Shir, Uri Kum Barak of Shevya Shevyacha. Then Yadala Yasei Tishlachna, she talks about Ya'el's description. And then her criticism of Reuven and Gad and Meroz and all these other people is the criticism of inaction. This is all about human action. What's fascinating is that this song could not be more different than the Shir HaSayam, and that's for a number of reasons. Reason number one is that the nation of Israel, was a slave nation. They didn't have arms. They didn't have psychological wherewithal. They had nothing they need. They were literally babies who needed to be fed by God. They needed to be protected by God right then. But we're no longer there. Hashem is weaning us off that divine protection into the land of Israel, where He says, I'm going to be found through history. I'm going to be found through a myriad of human decisions as you choose to abide my calling. That's much more powerful. And that is the model of today. The model of today is the difficulty is being able to sing the Shiras Devora after 1967, after 1973, after every single battle, to sing it after Operation Roaring Lion, to be able to sing the song of Devora and say, that was God. Meaning, just let me take you back 2 years. We had our shul in Friday after dinner. Rabbi Weil spoke at our shul on a Friday night dinner, and he was describing the circle of fire. Do you remember this? There was Hezbollah with 150,000 rockets pointed aimed at Israel. There was Hamas. There were hostages in Hamas. At that time, well over 100, and around I saw 150 hostages still left in Gaza. There was the militia in western Iraq. There were the Houthis sending missiles every single day. At Iran, we couldn't even think about Iran. That was 2 years ago. Right now, like with all the deficiencies and all the complexities, think about what's happened. Right? Hamas they're going to rebuild, but right now, there are nothing. We have all the hostages are back. Hezbollah now have around, they estimate 12,000 rockets. And yes, they're making bigger noise and so on. There are nothing. We could never have done this with others. Militia in western Iraq, we're not really hearing from them. The Houthis, thank God, Yamach Shemam V'Zikram are gone. Israel and America control the airspace of Iran. They've put back the program. Years, they've destroyed the supreme leader. We need to sing songs and realize that human action is the place in which God acts. Sometimes we think of it, we can only sing songs of Shir HaSayam. I'm only prepared to sing when I see the waters of the Yam Suf coming and taking away the enemies. But Devora is saying, I'm going to sing on this victory. I'm going to sing on the action and criticize the inaction of human beings, because that's the platform in which God is recognized. I think it's so much more profound to appreciate seeing HaKadosh Baruch Hu in history than perhaps in great supernatural experiences, which is what Devora is saying. These could not be more different songs, because history has changed. We're no longer in the Torah, we're in Nach. And in Nach, this is perhaps where we see God, and that allows us today to see God as well. Anyways, it's very, very relevant to today. Thank you, everybody, for taking the time.